Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and this is Sustainable Hawaii at ThinkTech.com, streaming live educational and civic engagement on the internet and Oceanic Channel 16. Today we're talking about the problem of waste. Most people don't realize that waste, every which way you look at it, costs taxpayers. From paying for the garbage pickup and disposal in the landfill or burning it at H-Power in Honolulu, to the cost of the environmental impact of these practices that deplete our natural resources and impact our health. Whether from off-gassing from materials in the production process or from the pollution from burning it, waste also costs us by robbing us of clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and clean soils and oceans that provide us with food. We all can contribute to a more sustainable Hawaii by making less waste, and as taxpayers, we can influence the way our government disposes of it. Our show today addresses the issue of waste production and disposal with our expert guest, Nicole Chatterson, the Waste Issue Team Lead for Hawaii Green Growth, who also serves as RISE Program Manager at Kupu and Education Chair for the Surfrider Foundation, Oahu Chapter. Nicole's self-stated goal, which I love, is to support the longevity of natural, cultural, and community ecosystems through reform of our current waste consumption cycle. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
We're delighted. Tell me about how you got interested in waste system processes.
Sure. Well, I grew up next to a dump in a small community in Southern California called Palmdale. So our home was on the outskirts of town. And I watched the mountain of the dump get built throughout my childhood. And paired with that, my sister and I would go on these epic desert explorations. It was a high desert town. And there's something about the desert ecosystem that isn't quite as valued as, a lush forest ecosystem. And people felt really comfortable dumping the trash there that they didn't want to have to pay to put in the dump. So this outdoor playground that was so important to us was smattered with these heaps of unwanted items. So from a young age, I was really aware of the problem. And during my undergrad, I had the opportunity to study environmental science and policy, which gave me a broader perspective of the issue. And my first job out of college was with a research institution looking at the topic of marine debris, which tied me back into the waste system.
What kinds of projects did you do in your research? And was marine debris the only area you looked at?
So at that time, my focus was on marine debris. I started off as sort of a typical nonprofit employee wearing many hats. So I would dabble in research and operations. And when I finished my undergraduate degree, I had gathered enough sailing experience for the nonprofit to say, hey, come on one of the research expeditions with us. And that's when I really started looking at the microplastic load in the ocean. So we would do at-sea trawls and then bring those back to the lab and analyze them under a microscope so we could see the whole sort of size class of plastic.
And what kind of results did you see from your research?
So there were numbers that were generated out of that research that there are 5 to 9 times more microplastic than plankton, which is the base of the ocean food chain.
So say that again?
5 to 9 times more microplastic than plankton. And through more research, we've found that those numbers vary quite a bit. So it depends where you're looking. But in some places, there is more density of plastic than there is of the base of the food chain.
Do those tend to be more near shore, or are they out to sea as well?
So everything we studied here was offshore, and there's a particular region of the ocean called a gyre that tends to collect this type of debris. So we studied the North Pacific gyre.
There are 2 gyres, right?
There's actually 5. So there's North Pacific, South Pacific, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Indian Ocean. And then depending on who you speak to, there's also sub-gyres.
But these are all areas where trash is collecting, because we hear about the Pacific Gyre, and I assume there was 1 or 2, there's 5.
There's 5.
My
yeah.
goodness. And are they equally as dense with traffic, with trash?
Yeah, there have been high numbers detected in all of the gyres.
Wow.
Because of the nature of water being a moving mass, it depends when you sample what you're seeing.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. So with regard to waste in Hawaii,
Yeah.
what brought you here and what got you focused on our solid waste system?
Sure. So it was actually that research trip with Algalita Marine Research Foundation was the name of that first nonprofit I worked for. And we stopped over on Oahu during our 7-week voyage. And like many other humans, I fell in love with Hawaii and wanted to figure out how I could make my life here and contribute to the well-being of this incredible place.
Yeah.
So I started off at Volcano National Park, just trying to get into the conservation field. And I did avian surveys, so I learned how to identify bird calls and identify all the different native and non-native bird species.
That must have been, at the one hand, very, very rewarding. On the other hand, was it a little disheartening, or did you find that it was not as bad a situation as you thought in terms of their numbers?
So on Hawaii Island, there are a few species that are still doing really well. So the apapane is really prevalent.
That's a bird.
That's a bird, yeah. It's one of the few native birds that still has a strong population hold. The amakihi, another native bird, was really prevalent. So that was nice to see. But the number of species that were rare was definitely disheartening, and the number of non-native species we had.
Right. And that led you then
to Oahu, eventually, where I started working for a group called Tetra Tech.
Mm-hmm.
So through Tetra Tech, I was able to be a part of more marine debris projects, which kept me tied into sort of the waste cycle. And my next step after that was with the RISE program at Kupu.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I became involved in Hawaii Green Growth, and I was able to take on different opportunities to kind of dig more into our waste system here. I became involved.
Because you wanted to look at the source of all this debris.
Right. So my curiosity in seeing this junk in all these places that it shouldn't be, I became curious and motivated to address the source of the problem. So I started taking on projects and creating my workload so that I could do some of that.
I would think that that's a bigger and bigger focus of the federal government, the state government, the county governments, because we all realize that there has to be a source for all of this debris and we've got to catch it on the upstream. Can you tell us a little bit about the Hawaii waste disposal system and how it works and what is happening?
Sure. So in Hawaii, we have what is called a downstream or reactive waste management system. And if you think about the waste hierarchy, at the top of it is reduction, and then recycling, and then disposal. So all of our actions are targeted at that least preferred point of the hierarchy, where we're on the offense, deflecting trash as it comes in, right, and creating systems to manage it.
And so let's look at the system that our reactive downstream system,
sure,
and how it works. I know that we have 2 landfills, we have H-Power. Walk us through what happens with our garbage when we throw it out into the street, or we throw it into our bins that are then collected on the street. And I think we have some visuals to illustrate.
Great. So the vast majority of residential waste is collected and taken to H-Power. The statistics are around 80 to 90% of our waste stream is going there. Construction and demolition debris is still landfilled, and there's select items that can't be incinerated. And to clarify what H-Power is...
And this is a picture of the whole H-Power plant.
Yes.
And the process of building the new sludge, that's the new burner. And then there's also a new sludge reception facility, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what happens at H-Power is our trash is combusted, it's burned, and then that energy derived from the burning process is put back into the grid.
And that's about 10% of our energy supply, is according to the city and county, right?
Not consistently. So when you talk to Blue Planet Foundation, mm-hmm, they have the name is escaping me, but they have a monitoring system for our different renewable energy inputs.
Right.
And so it's not consistently delivering 10%. It has the capacity to deliver up to.
I imagine it somewhat depends on the ferrous metals and things that they're pulling out, and they are recycling, right?
Right, and there's things like food waste in the stream of material they're getting that isn't great to burn. So there's all these, you're dealing with a diverse and vast pile of trash, and everything burns differently, so that affects the power output.
That's another reason why it's important to separate out our food waste.
Right.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then if it goes to H-Power, I think, if it doesn't go to H-Power, then it goes to the landfills. We have one in Waianae Gulch and one in Nanakuli, right?
Yeah.
And I think we have pictures of those as well. The one behind us is a trash heap in Waianae Gulch. I'm sorry, Waimanalo Gulch in Waianae, right? And then we also have the Nanakuli, and you mentioned that's just deconstruction waste.
Right.
Right, interesting. So you mentioned upstream versus downstream, and reactive versus proactive. Can you explain a little more what is a proactive approach to the waste stream?
Sure. So the two main proactive approaches out there are called sustainable materials management and zero waste. And they're really one and the same. Zero waste has a more of a firm line name. And the goal is actually to reduce the amount of waste generated by 85%.
Okay.
Both zero waste and sustainable materials management share the view that materials should be used for their highest and best purpose, taking into account human health, environmental health. So it sets the stage for questioning the existence of certain items that we're now so used to throwing away. So is a plastic bag the highest and best use of the fossil fuels that went in to create it, or could those have been better used for another purpose and the waste associated with it avoided?
And it's also then looking at how we function in our daily lives and looking at different materials or different products to use rather than same old use of plastic bags, etc.
Exactly. So the upstream philosophies support redesign. They support components of a circular economy where you're not extracting virgin materials, but you're reusing, figuring out how to reuse what you have.
And we have a great diagram you provided us here. And I want to just highlight for our audience, upstream means, if you could explain.
Sure. Upstream means everything that happens before the end of life of the product. So it's the purchase and the use, the distribution of the product, the design of the product, the resource extraction. And associated with that upstream component, research is showing that 71 tons of debris, of waste are created at that point. And what...
In Hawaii?
This is globally. So the global average, there's, for every 1 ton of municipal solid waste that we deal with at that end of life piece, there are 71 tons of waste created upstream.
Oh my goodness.
So just focusing on the end of life of the product is missing a lot of the negative impacts that are associated with the life of that good.
So on this diagram, walk us around the circle.
Okay, sure. So starting at resource extraction, that's not always natural resources. It could be the creation of synthetic materials. Those materials are processed, and at every stage there are energy and water and land inputs going in, and waste inputs and potentially pollution inputs coming out. So materials processing, this could look like actually creating plastic.
Creating synthetic material, you mentioned, which is also often using chemically derived materials, including petroleum.
Exactly. Or paper, that processing of paper has a lot of externalities associated with it.
Right.
The design and manufacturing, so once the material is created, replicating whatever the thing is. We'll use the example of plastic water bottles. It's an industry, and associated with an industrial process is energy and water and land.
So if we have proactive design using the highest and best use of each material, we're going to help remove some of that 71 ton per ton of waste out of the stream before it even gets to the reactive phase, right?
Exactly.
Well, we'll come back to this diagram in a moment. We're going to have a break, and we're talking with Nicole, and we'll look forward to see her back here in a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at ThinkTechHawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner with Sustainable Hawaii, and my guest is Nicole Chatterson, and we are having a conversation about the upstream issues of waste system in Hawaii and the ability to prevent waste from getting into the system. And if we can call that diagram back up on the screen, we were talking about the product design and manufacture as a way to inhibit more waste from coming into the system. Can you talk us through the distribution and retail, Nicole?
Sure. So this piece is particularly relevant to Hawaii, where most of the goods we use are produced elsewhere and having to be shipped in. So associated with that shipping process, there are fossil fuel inputs resulting in greenhouse gas emissions. So one of the upstream approaches to address this is replacing goods markets with services markets. A great example of this is CDs. So instead of shipping CDs around now, most people are buying music on iTunes and Spotify. So it becomes more of a service and less of a good that's needing to be distributed.
That's a great example. So instead of piling up CDs in our house and chucking them, what we're going to do is go online and listen to the music. That brings all kinds of other issues for the music industry, but they're solving that. And like many changes in our global needs, business tends to change with it and are accommodating. So one of the things I know we get a lot of pushback from industry in making those kinds of changes because they've found distribution avenues and revenue streams that work, right? And so you're advocating that we look at that differently, and business is the best place to innovate to make those change.
Yeah, and there's some incredible things going on. And I think you brought up a good point with the reservation to make these changes, because we understand business as usual. We understand the processes we have now. And there's a component of bravery required to shift to an authentic upstream waste system.
And particularly businesses that are innovative and looking at future needs, they're going to grasp that reality and take advantage of being the early adopters or the first entry into the market and be able to benefit from not having a great deal of competition if they innovate earlier. At the same time, we as consumers have to respond and be willing to take up that challenge and go with those innovations and change our behaviors, right? I want to talk about that more further, but first I have a question about H-Power, since we began with that. Since H-Power is producing 10%, up to 10% of our energy, renewable energy, right, because it's a renewed resource, and at the same time it's diverting up to 90% of the waste from the landfills, then why is H-Power not the best choice?
Incineration is a complicated beast, if you will. There's a lot going on there. The piece that's probably most concerning in terms of using it as our primary method of waste management would be the contract that is associated with it. So
Interesting.
the city and county of Honolulu is required to deliver X amount of tons to Covanta, which is the
Operator. right?
operator of
Yeah.
H Power. If we don't do that, then we pay a fine to make up for lost profit from the operation. So what that does is it undermines our ability to actually reduce the amount of waste we generate in the first place.
Because there's an incentive for us to generate more waste
Yeah.
and not be fined. Wow, that's enlightening. I don't think most people realize that.
It's called a pay-as-you-throw contract. So Indianapolis is currently undergoing this conversation that Honolulu's been having for a while, which is, hey, we think you're a component of our waste management system, but this contract really isn't serving the higher purpose of the community and the environment.
So how would we change that?
So that's a great question. We're in a fixed contract term, and I'm not totally clear when that is up, but it requires some really sensitive conversations around how do we balance the coexistence of a waste reduction mindset with a technology that requires waste input. And does that mean phasing out burners over time instead of adding more? That's one solution that's been
And I
put forth.
imagine it's also an issue of the company needing to be able to make itself relevant
Right.
and not be just cut out and somewhat of the same issue that we're having with our monopoly utility company,
Right.
As people go to more and more renewable energy that they're putting on their rooftops or in the windmills on their properties and commercial needs, we might be alienating the purpose of the whole utility company. So we get back to that issue of businesses needing to innovate and adapt and change.
And it's one of the things I appreciate about the upstream model is it puts the demand back in the hands of the consumer. So we want this type of product, we want this type of service, instead of a system saying this is the service we're offering you, and thus tailor your everyday activities to that.
Right.
Another relevant piece of the H Power conversation is it ignores the 71 tons of upstream waste. So when you think about, it's often referred to as the wasteberg, and what we see at the municipal level is the tip of the waste.
I think we have a great illustration of the wasteberg.
There it is, the wasteberg.
Yes.
So
So explain that.
So the tip is municipal solid waste. This is what H Power sees coming into their facility, what we're throwing away daily. The bottom part of the wasteberg is everything that's happened in that upstream cycle that we talked about earlier that's not being addressed in the current system. And an interesting piece of research put forth by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is that 42% of our greenhouse gas emissions as a nation are directly related to our, what they call the materials consumption cycle. So our
So
use
that
of the-
upstream portion, which kind of contradicts our intuition here because it's the down part of the iceberg.
That's true,
The
yeah.
part underneath the water actually represents all of that upstream, and that is 42% or 46, you said, of our greenhouse
gas
gases.
emissions.
Okay, so that's a huge, almost a half of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the upstream cycle, which is yet another reason to start paring down our production of waste, rather than just focusing on that behind us,
Right.
which is throwing it out and what to do with it, and the recycling. So interesting, and this is really a good example of our throwaway society. We're going to talk about that later, but the concept there is, right, that was something from the 50s that I think you're going to talk about later. The concept is that for every ton, and I can't drive this home more, I think this is one of the most important things that we've talked about so far, for every ton of waste we produce, there's 70 tons produced in the production process before it even gets to that piece of waste.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing that H Power does is it recycles, right? So we talked about the cost benefits of H-Power. They're taking out the ferrous materials once they get to the H-Power because they can't burn them. But wouldn't it be better if they never got in that stream, is what you're
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
What are some ways we can remove the ferrous metals and other things from our waste stream?
A lot of that would be product design, so tracing back the major sources of our ferrous materials. So that's sort of a long, complicated answer, but it comes down to changing what we're asking of the market and what the market is giving us.
And is there a great deal of, we mentioned business innovation, but also research and development going on at universities and with the federal government in changing some of these materials? For
Yeah.
instance, I know a very well-known example is Interplay Carpet Company that changed how they manufacture carpets so that when we are ready to change out our carpets, it doesn't just go into the dump behind us, but the materials are taken apart and recycled into many different products.
Right.
And they deliberately developed those carpets so that they were used materials that could be recycled and retained in the upstream waste system, right?
Which is a big part of the concept of sustainable materials management is actually not using that word waste.
Uh-huh.
You're not managing waste, which by definition is something worth not having around, but you're managing materials. So everything, even at the end of its original design life, so carpet, can be then pulled apart and used again.
So every input into the process is looked at as a valuable resource,
Right.
not to be wasted.
Right.
So just eliminate the word waste. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that happening in our school systems, in our education, both K through 12 as well as the higher education? Are people beginning to take that on?
The focus of the education sector right now, I would say, is energy, because it has the highest upfront payback in terms of switching over to energy efficient practices saves them a lot of money.
Right.
That same payback isn't as apparent with waste, although it's there. So I'd say the focus in our education system right now is on that, which is fantastic. Trailing behind at the grassroots level within schools is this waste reduction mindset. So you see teachers starting compost piles, you see paperless classrooms happening. So I would say that's still driven at kind of that grassroots
That's
level.
interesting. So we need to develop more curriculum about these issues of proactive versus reactive waste,
Absolutely.
and about what materials, what is the term again?
Sustainable materials management. So I actually
Thank
had
you.
a conversation with the EPA about this at a conference last month. And nobody likes the name sustainable materials management. It's a mouthful, so they're still working on it. And they're at the stage where the research is still being completely refined, and they're not totally ready to launch the idea to the public. So it's a little bit of an intentional process that it's not fully integrated yet.
Well, maybe that's something we can work on at Green Growth.
Yeah.
Certainly, we have all the minds that sit at the table representing conservation, representing energy, representing even the visitor industry, as well as, of course, invasive species and endangered species support. So I really applaud your participation in that. What constitutes I want to delve a little deeper into what constitutes the materials issue. And I know you had another really good visual of the plastic bottles.
Oh, sure.
And so talk to us about how that is illustrative of this whole materials, sustainable materials process.
Yes. So this chart shows the greenhouse gas emissions associated with bottled water consumption. And you can see that, and this is using virgin material plastic. So a plastic bottle disposed of has more associated emissions than a recycled plastic bottle. But if you just don't bring the plastic bottle into existence in the first place, there's close to zero emissions associated with reusing an alternative water receptacle.
And the important thing is that yellow bar on the
Yes.
right, which is use tap water.
Use tap
Tap
water.
water in Hawaii and many other places is actually very clean,
Right.
very good source. It's filtered down through our volcanic soils, and our aquifers are great clean sources of water. So refilling that water bottle, and not a plastic water bottle, right?
Ideally not, but if you're refilling that, that's better than throwing it away.
Right. What are some of the other water bottle materials that we should be using? Because that's something that we all face when we go to buy one. So we want to make sure we're getting the right kind.
So there are a couple great stainless steel water bottle manufacturers. Clean Canteen, Hydro Flask. Hydro Flask has a new break-off branch, and I'm not recalling what they're called. But it's quality material that some of the unfortunately less expensive options don't use. And what they do is they'll use a metal mix, and then they actually coat it with plastic on the inside. So another problem with using plastic to house water is when the plastic is heated up or frozen, there's a chemical exchange that happens, and some of the plasticizers and other additives that go into creating the plastic can leach into water.
It's actually off-gassing into the water we're drinking, so it's better to put it in stainless steel.
Yeah, and stainless steel that doesn't have that plastic coating. And so far I found the best way to weed out those plastic coated ones are to go with Clean Canteen and Hydro Flask.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go to a break, and we'll come back and talk more about specifically how we can use better materials.
Great.
We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Carlos Juarez, host of Global Connections, and I want to invite you to come join us. We cover a range of global issues. We bring a lot of expert opinion, a lot of issues, whether they're contemporary events happening in the world or maybe looking at things from a more historical perspective. Global issues, very important for us to understand in this globally interconnected world. Join us here on Global Connections.
Aloha, my name is Kaui Lucas. I am the host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here every Friday on ThinkTech Hawaii at 3 p.m. I invite people who are doing interesting and inspiring things in our community to help us keep it local and keep it real. Tune in any Friday, 3 p.m. and also available on our YouTube channel and my blog, kauilucas.com. Hawaii is my mainland. Aloha.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner. Sustainable Hawaii is our topic, or our show name, and our topic is waste and reforming the waste system. So, Nicole, we just were talking about more materials issues, because I think this is something that's very important for our audience to be able to discern. We want to know how we can help, how we get involved with improving the waste stream. You mentioned, we were talking about recycled plastic bottles, and you mentioned during the break that actually the off-gassing of recycling those and also creating those has some more detrimental impacts than we realized. Can you explain that?
Sure. So EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, has a way of modeling the greenhouse gas emissions associated with materials. They call it the WARM model. And so in that research, they found that when you burn plastic for waste to energy, so plastic is predominantly fossil fuel. It has a high carbon load, and burning the carbon is what creates the greenhouse gas emissions. So when you burn that for incineration, you're actually contributing more greenhouse gas than that unit of plastic saves.
Wow.
The utility from having to ship in oil.
Right.
So it's not quite the direct savings that we understand it is.
So the balance between the transportation or bringing in of oil, which burns oil to get the oil
Right.
here, right, and how that pollutes the air, versus the air pollution that's created from creating the plastic bottles and or recycling them, is a wash almost, or maybe even worse.
Right. And because we're burning mixed materials and not just plastics, that adds a component to this situation, to the emissions that we're saving in total.
So all the good we think we're doing by creating renewable energy in Hawaii may be offset by our use of plastics.
Yeah, by the upstream impacts of it all. And the EPA actually doesn't formally recognize waste to energy as renewable. That's what we call it here. But because the materials going into it aren't renewable, they're human created.
So the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States federal government does not call burning waste renewable.
Yeah.
We, however, do call that renewable and include it as part of our renewable portfolio standard, which has now changed just in the last week to a new name, and I'm forgetting what it is right now. Do you remember?
No, I don't
Okay,
recall.
we'll talk about that on another show. But that is a very important point, and we need to catch up with the federal government. We're often ahead of them, but in this case, it sounds like when it comes to waste, we have some catching up to do.
They're leading the charge. It's refreshing and incredible to see.
That's wonderful. Well, one of the important things about this show is that we educate and we inform, and we also want to be a conduit for this information to the broader audience. Tell us a little bit about your efforts at educating and the different organizations you're working with and how we can get involved. That's a lot to ask all at once. You
Sure.
can attack it one by one.
Okay, so part of what I do is I serve on the executive committee for Surfrider Oahu chapter as their education chair. And so through that.
And remind us what Surfrider Oahu does.
So Surfrider's focus is on preserving the health of our coastal ecosystems and oceans. And so because of the marine debris issue that we spoke about earlier, Surfrider and a long list of other impacts that waste has on water quality, Surfrider's really invested in seeing waste reduced.
And I think we have a great visual of the trash on the coastline, as well as it doesn't just impact the water, right, and for recreational purposes, but animals.
Yes.
And so maybe we could pop those up there.
So there's
We have a bird,
an albatross.
An albatross.
So this is a well-known image now from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, taken by a woman, Cynthia Vanderlip. And so albatross spend a long time foraging over the ocean before they come. And there's so much trash out there now that they're starting to mistake it for food. And so their stomachs become full of this indigestible material, and they end up dying because of it.
And that's actually a great illustration for the human consumption as well, because as those break down in the water, we're consuming the chemicals that have gone into making those products. And as they break down in the soil and it leaches into aquifers, which we're not having a problem yet with in Hawaii, but other places have, definitely.
Yeah,
So,
and that research is now clear.
And this one is from your research, right?
Yeah, so this is the trip I mentioned that brought me to Hawaii. We would put out trawls and scoop up whatever happened to be out there, and this is one. You can see how tiny the plastic is and how much is in there in relation to the biosha or biological material.
And so in your educational programs with Surfrider and with Kupu,
Yes.
You show these kinds of slides, you find organisms on the beach, you're out there working in the field with the kids?
So at Kupu, we recently did a project with NOAA and the Department of Health to remove marine debris on the Kahuku shoreline. So we removed over 2 tons up there.
Wow.
And
In what period of time?
that was over the span of a summer, so we did several different cleanups. So we're seeing those tiny pieces of plastic, now termed mesoplastic. Microplastic is actually what you have to look through a microscope to see.
Okay.
So we removed some of that mesoplastic and then large, illegally dumped items.
And kupu, remind us what it is, because I want our audience to be aware and know where to find them.
Kupu's fantastic. You can Google us at kupuhawaii.org. So we're a youth engagement nonprofit focused on connecting youth with opportunities in conservation and sustainability. So we have 4 different programs. The one I work with focuses on college students and connecting them up with kind of their first big break in the sustainability
And that's the
field.
RISE program.
That's the RISE program.
Right. So it's channeling youth energy and enthusiasm and their great minds into solutions for the waste stream, as well as conservation of plants and animals and other things.
Yes.
And I think that's a phenomenal program. It goes hand in hand with many other programs that we're experiencing, duplicating, rising, more and more opportunities for youth and adults to become involved. And I've interviewed some of them on this show. I imagine Kupu is partnering with some of those organizations?
Yes, Kupu has over 80 partner sites in the state.
Terrific.
And that's just with the HYCC program, which is our AmeriCorps-based
HYCC is?
Hawaii Youth Conservation Corps.
Right.
So there's 80 partner sites associated with that program, and then RISE has over 20 different partners that we've worked with in the past 5 years.
And in that partnership, are you finding you're able to leverage your funding more to be able to get more done?
Oh yeah, it's something funders actually ask for now, which I think is brilliant, is show the buy-in in your community, show that other nonprofits and the general public are interested in what you're doing and buy in. Mm-hmm. Because it's now very clear 20 people working on the same thing in silos wastes funds and doesn't do much for the movement. So it's really exciting to work in a collaborative space where we share resources and are working towards the same goal with our slightly different slants and skill sets that we bring to the table.
So you're working on preserving the upstream waste cycle for dollars for nonprofits as well.
Yes.
So it's important that, what did our parents always say, waste not, want not?
Yeah.
You provided us with a great slide of a World War II poster that I'd love to put up here. This is a Life magazine about throwaway living, and that was in the 50s, but even earlier, we have one of the poster of World War II, and that's another great one of the 50s. Throw away your Dixie cups, you know, making life easy. But the last one, there we go, is that conservation out of scarcity, right?
Yes. So what I find fascinating about this is we're in a stage right now where we think that it's difficult to change behavior, but we've done it before. So we found a cause to rally around, which was supporting our nation during this wartime effort, and we said we will do everything we can to make sure our resources can go to that. So there's hope for finding our new rallying cause, which maybe is climate change, maybe it's something else, but we know that we can change on a large scale.
And we could actually take these posters today, put them up. It's not necessarily World War II and an immediate battle, although one could argue with what's going on in the Middle East. But our U.S. Military has said that climate change and its impacts and sustainability and the lack of the receding amount of access to natural resources is the #1 national security concern for the United States. So in a way, we are in a battle. And that poster could be put up around our campuses, our offices today. I want you to look in that camera and tell us what you would like us to do in that battle against waste production and reducing the waste stream.
Sure. So one step we can take now is working to reform the city and county of Honolulu's waste system. So we've submitted a proposal to amend our city constitution to include waste reduction as a priority. So over the next year, this is going to be a topic that you'll have the opportunity to input on. If you would like more information, you can email me at education@surfrider.oahu.org, and we can talk more about how you can provide testimony and input on that.
So, Nicole, I appreciate you for challenging us. We're going to all go out there and talk to our council members We're going to talk to our legislators as well. This should be a statewide as well as a county-wide effort, and make sure that we are doing our part within our homes, our offices, our daily lives everywhere we come into contact with reducing our waste stream. Thank you so much for all your hard work, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you, everyone.